Virai costas a castanha.
Being a musician nowadays with so much influence surrounding you. And we started that way, singing in English. We also sang a lot in Portuguese from Brazil.
We were like just wondering what we are, what musicians and artists in the world. You know, it just happened to us in Berlin to listen to Portuguese old folk songs. We also discovered a thing that was very important for us. It was like, what is about this anthropophagia? And we were like, okay, this makes totally sense, because at a certain point we were just like playing Senhora do Almortão, that is like traditional popular song, with the electric guitar. And of course some Puritans would like, oh my God, you know, what you're doing with this. You know, we were this cultural cannibalism.
Senhora do Almortão, Senhora do Almortão, ando vestida de preto.
Hey everybody, welcome to Sama, Seattle. We're not in Seattle right now, we're actually in Lisbon. And we just saw a stunning performance from Lavoisier. I'm here with Umberto, I'm here with Patricia, and I'm here with my dear friend Mike Steller, who actually introduced me to this band on a beautiful night over delicious food and conversation about music. And Mike and I go back quite a bit, and over some wine, he opened up a laptop, and this music just filled the room. And I suddenly was like, I need more of this right now. How do we begin this conversation? An exchange was made. Technology offers a lot of opportunities. We started chatting. Some files were shared, and I got a chance to play it on my show on KXP. We're here now for Womex, and we actually met, and this happened live. So we're going to talk a little bit about this music. We're going to talk about a bunch of things. It's going to be a really great show, a great conversation. Tell me, when did you realize that this was something that you wanted to share with people? When did you feel like, okay, this needs to be in front of an audience for it to be complete? If I could say that.
No, definitely. For us, we didn't study music, so for us, to make music and to be aware that it was important, it was the audience thing. It was very the performing life was how we learned to make music, and we grow so much with the audience and with the live situations. It's just much better than 100 rehearsals, you know. So in Berlin, we started there, and it's a huge city.
Why'd you move to Berlin?
Yeah, so
That's a nice question. I think it was Patricia's fault. No, or great idea. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
But it was we finished our graduation in an art school in Caldas da Rainha, and then we decided that, okay, what should we do now? We have a degree. What should we do? And Patricia was really eager on going out of Portugal and try to live in a different country, in a different culture. And Berlin came up because of the friends. And at that time, it was kind of a city that was exploding. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. And
also a cheap city, kind of to begin a life. It's not like London or Barcelona. It's you can have part-time job and then do your music and still have time for both. And Berlin, it's quite a magical city. You know, you have a lot, I don't know how much venues you have in that city. You can play all weekends in a different venue.
But you sound so Portuguese. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You sound so of this. When I hear this, if you would have told me, Mike Steller, that this band is out of Berlin, I would have been like, whatever. Mike has beautiful taste, and so I'm going to listen to what he's offering, and the music that we heard, which we just all heard here, really speaks to this experience that I was having. It was my first time in Lisbon. We're having dinner. Friends are around, and this music comes in, and it was cinematic. It was okay, this is exactly what I wanted to hear in this night in Lisbon. Mm-hmm. So, Berlin?
So yeah, that's we were just wondering what we are, what musicians and artists in the world. You know, it just happened to us in Berlin to listen to Portuguese old folk songs. It was the need. It was
Yes.
just outside that we really feel the need to know much more about the Portuguese old folk songs. That it's not easy to find them, to listen to it.
Being a musician nowadays with so much influence surrounding you, it's very attractive to go, for example, us listening to a lot of Anglo-Saxonic songs in the radio and the cinema, as you said, and all of this MTV world, like we were born in the 80s, so we got all this information. It would be pretty easy to go on that path, and we started that way, singing in English. And of course, with the soap operas from Brazil, the telenovela, we also sang a lot in Portuguese from Brazil. But in Berlin, somehow all these questions start to appear in our minds, sort of, but come on, we are Portuguese. Why don't we do Portuguese music? Where is the Portuguese music? What is the Portuguese music? That's how we decided to, okay, let's search for it. But let's really search for it. And it was hard in a way that it was not accessible. But when you dig and when you found out, it was so much potential on these old folk songs. And we searched for this very nice work of this ethnomusicologist called Michel Giacometti, a French guy who went to Portugal. Not only him, but a lot of them, but him especially, did this amazing job that recorded like video and sound. And this was, I think, our first contact with this really pure old folk Portuguese. And we fell in love, like we were homesick in Berlin in a very tiny apartment, listening to this old lady singing and really crying, like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And that was something that stuck to us. And after that.
Yeah, but also kind of revisiting your childhood, because I remember you telling me that some of the songs were the songs that your grandmother or your aunt would sing to you, and you also
That's true. Yeah.
Were you also in search not only of your Portuguese identity but of your own personal identity as you grow up and as you relive these memories of childhood and put them into art?
Yeah, that's true.
His family is from Trás-os-Montes, so it's like
Yes.
the north region of Portugal, and I'm from Beira, Serra da Estrela, so both interior.
Yeah.
And so we just grow up in Lisbon, but we are both sons of people that just moved to Lisbon to have a better life. But this was like very strong for us, and we were missing, of course, all the time, even growing up in such a huge city, but at the same time have the connection with this regions. And I guess musically speaking also, I don't know if
No, it was important, the background, the childhood, although back then when we were 10, 6-year-old, we didn't know what that was. But it was important to first dig in this ethnomusical work, and then afterwards relate it with our own roots, And I would say that in Lisbon in the 80s, I would say 80% of the families that were living in Lisbon were not from Lisbon, were from abroad or even from the old ex-colonies, from Africa. And for us, growing up in Odivelas, which is a suburb from Lisbon, you would gather a huge melting pot over there. And especially this background of the fields, it was there, You had a guy from the Beira which opened a coffee, and you had your own family that was from Trás-os-Montes, and then your colleagues in the school, their parents were also from the field. So you kind of relate to this background. And
then in Odivelas also like the Cape Verde and
The
all
Cape
the
Verde,
influence,
Angolan,
Angolan, we were like 10 or 11, and we learned how to dance kizomba,
And
or like
kuduro,
kuduro.
yeah.
And it was this melting pot that happened in the suburbs
The
of
suburbs.
Lisbon.
And where does the transformation start? So you start with this folk tradition. Your name also means the transformation of elements. Where does it start, all this confluence of influences,
It really started when you were growing up in Odivelas. I would say that a lot of kids growing up in this ugly neighborhood, because it was kind of a dorm place, you would develop your imagination inside a small room, you know, and everything was your world, kind of world. So, and you start to gather all this influence, you know, so it was pretty easy for us to find ourselves in a very tiny car, a Clio back then, listening to music all night long.
Yeah, but at the same time, we also discovered a thing that was very important for us. It was like the Tropicalistas, the movement that came there. And then we just dig a bit into the movement, not just the music. And then we just realize what is about this anthropophagia. And for us, like in Berlin at the beginning, and we were like, okay, makes totally sense, because at a certain point we were just like playing Senhora do Amortão, that is like traditional popular song, with the electric guitar and making this, you know, with our influences. And of course some Puritans would like, oh my God, you know, what you're doing with this. And for us, like this anthropophagia, like, you know, Brazil is like this melting pot, and we have to assume that we are this all influences, and this is melting pot, it's what we are. And at a certain point for us, it was like, yes, it's what we are. We are also from the 80s with electric guitar, our influences, being in Berlin, but, you know, be aware of the world, and just, you know, we were this cultural cannibalism also. We just accepted, and it was like, okay, this worked for us.
So let me ask you a question, because this, you actually led to a really interesting point, because this is a complicated country. Also, Portugal it's got Spain, it's got France, it's got like big neighbors that overshadow it. And the country has a history with colonies, has a history with some amazing cultures, you know, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique. They come together, they create something, they create music, they create art in various forms or another. And that is the new Portugal, especially in Lisbon. It's not fishermen songs or ancient songs from the fields. Where do you fit in that new Portugal?
Well, I think it's very vibrating, this reality in Lisbon, especially in Lisbon. In terms of Portugal, you feel it more in Lisbon, of course. But I think we fit in making part of the world, like Patricia was saying, like the influences and this cannibalism. It makes so much sense nowadays, because you have the internet and you have access to all this different kind of music, you know, and it's so easy to 1 second you're listening to the Beatles, whatever song, and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and then you listen to Elis Regina, and then you listen to Cesare Everen. And of course, like being in Lisbon, of course, it's present now, this all cultures, you know, you can go finally to a club and most easily find an African sort of spirit music, you know, it's definitely vibrating, but you know, I think you feel more about the world, especially the digital era that surrounds you, rather than the physical Lisbon that surrounds you.
But definitely, like, it's something that
we
feel, and we were speaking about was like this being Portuguese music in the world nowadays.
Yes,
and of course, we cannot forget about this richful, like, you know, cultures that we had access to.
Yes.
And this is like
that's your roots.
That's
exactly,
our roots,
yeah.
of course.
In general,
and I think the path of your albums, you have 4 albums now, and the evolution from one to another, you're still in search of something, and you started from a more traditional matrix, and throughout the time you opened up to other influences, to work with other musicians. You were pretty much closed in your bubble, working with a legendary sound engineer, José Fortes, which recorded some of the most important artists in Portugal in the last 50 years. But at the same time, you pay special attention to the Portuguese language. The language is really important for you, to the point that on your 3rd album, you went to musicate one of the most complex Portuguese writers, Miguel Torga. So explain me a little bit about that need for the Portuguese world, which is something, I wouldn't say traumatic for us to work with, but it's not something that comes...
For us, it was really important to start with a...
Well, poetry was like also a very important thing at the beginning. And we, like the first album, we had like a poem from Fernando Pessoa. Language, it was very important. And at the time that we decided also in Berlin to start to sing in Portuguese, for me, it was just the easiest way to express myself. It's not a thing of, you know, I just need to sing in Portuguese. No, it's not that. It's just like I feel comfortable with that. Miguel Torga was really important because it's a poet that is a bit...
it's very earth-linked then,
yeah,
but it can be very dark. His background was a little bit more different than the others because he was really poor. So in terms of this bourgeois, let's call it, poet background. He was an outsider. He came from the
fields, yeah.
from the fields, and he was really poor. So he had to go to Brazil to earn some money working for his uncle, and then he came back. So of course, when you read and when you feel involved with this words and this imaginary that Miguel Torga presents, you feel like Portugal is this also, you know. It's very funny because we went to Brazil a couple of times and Brazil doesn't have a clue about our really dark period with the dictatorial time, and that everybody was poor back then. Like everybody, I would say 80% of the people was really poor. 60% were illiterate, like nobody could read or nobody could write. So you could see how damage this makes to people, you know. And sometimes when you want to introduce this dark mood or whatever, it's like, hey guys, Portugal is this also, you know. Like it's important that it's not only this beautiful country with the light on, and it's also that, but it has some deeper underground stuff.
I think that's the stuff that needs to be seen, because or heard. The reality is that this small country has a language, and that language is spoken by way more people that actually live here, and it has a relationship with these cultures. You know, we've seen artists from Angola, Mozambique, we've seen artists from Brazil that has a deep impact on this country. But it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the cultural impact, the exchange that could be going on, but with Angola, with Mozambique, with Brazil, is it's complicated because of the history, and it's recent. You know, it's not like 100 years ago. It's recent. But I feel now that, you know, there's a whole other generation, and in a context of musicians such as yourself and others, there's an opportunity to start a dialogue that is free of that baggage, because it's a whole new generation. And to your point, in Brazil, they have no idea. You know, they're not thinking about this. This happened the late 1800s. So this is a really interesting time for artists such as yourself, where I'm listening to it's like Portugal, Lisbon, instantly, and that could probably be the same effect in other countries. And it kind of you end up being almost like an evangelist in this way, not directly, like, you know, believe in me, I'll show you the way, but in this really beautiful, subtle way where it's like, why am I feeling this? Why are you taking me there? In a really interesting way. And Mike, in the context of, like, you know, as a selector and a collector of all this stuff, you know, you could have presented a whole bunch of stuff to me, and you do. When I heard this, I was like, this is ancient, but it's also super future. You're presenting something that also counters the Western dominance of culture. Like, you know, it's like you're not emulating English music, creating your own particular style. And it feels like this, I guess they call it Luz Africa, like, you know, a combination of all these things. But this could be a really interesting thing where what Portugal could be offering to that is what you are to me.
Yeah, I think they are exactly that. There's something that happens in their concerts, and I look around, and what I see in the people attending the concerts is that the moment they start, something happens in the room, and they are very brave to do what they do, because their music is deep, and it requires attention. You know, people either are like, wow, I need to pay attention to this, and you can feel it in the ambient of the room, and it's very intense. You know, when you sing the stuff from Miguel Torga, the words are strong. You know, you cannot be indifferent to it. So I have to thank you and congratulate you for doing this this work.
Yeah,
you know?
No, awesome. Yeah,
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Come on,
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you. This is Sama Seattle in Lisbon, and we'll be doing more very soon. Thank you for listening.
Não há ser como há o gesto, nem certeza que não sei, tu ainda que não possas dizer que não. Nessa canção e levar vencer quando começar a doer. No gesto que ela fez, prendeu o olhar e o tempo deixou de existir. No seu jeito enternecedor, eu morro impregnado de dor. No seu gesto madrugador, acorda, já cheguei, amor. Só para vencer quando começar a doer. Não há ser como há o gesto, nem certeza que não certo, ainda que não possas dizer que não. Nessa canção ele vai aparecer. Nessa canção ele tem que esmorecer. Só pode vencer quando começar. Beijar pra ver o mar e a tarde cá. Não tarde pra encontrar o sol tão lindo e livre pela beira da estrada vai. Vou neste mundo tão louco a queimar. Uma estrada se abrirá com a noite, que neste mundo quente nasce, arrebenta. Onde tudo é frenesi e caem em lágrimas se derramam, ondas sob a lua acesa.
Pela beira da estrada vai. Vou neste mundo tão louco a queimar.
Uma estrada se abrirá com a noite, que neste mundo quente nasce, arrebenta. Onde tudo é frenesi e caem em lágrimas se derrama, ondas sob a lua acesa. Cai dos olhos a estrela, vem-me beijar, beijar o mar nesse mundo louco na penumbra. Cai dos olhos a estrela, vem-me beijar, beijar o mar nesse mundo louco na penumbra. Nas águas, nas ondas, nos olhos, na alma. Nas águas, nas ondas, nos olhos, na alma. Nos olhos líquidos de Iemanjá. 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 Beija-me, beija o mar. Beija, beija, mãe, beija o mar. Beija, mãe, beija o mar. Beija, beija, mãe, beija o mar. Beija, mãe, Iemanjá. 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 Beija o mar, beija, beija a mãe, beija o mar. Foi bonito o meu sonho de amor. Floriram em redor todos os campos em pousio. Um sol de abril brilhou em pleno estio, lavado e promissor. Só que não houve frutos dessa primavera. A vida disse que era tarde demais. Só que não houve frutos dessa primavera. A vida disse que era tarde demais.
E que as paixões tardias são ironias dos deuses desleais. Ironias dos deuses desleais. São ironias dos deuses desleais. Foi bonito
O meu sonho de amor. Floriram em redor todos os campos em pousio. um sol de abril brilhou em pleno estio, lavado e promissor. Só que não houve frutos dessa primavera. Ai, a vida disse que era tarde demais
e que as paixões tardias são ironias dos deuses desleais. Ironias dos deuses desleais.
Foi bonito. Senhora, Senhora do amor tão, Senhora do amor tão. Oh, minha linda Raiana, virai costas, virai costas a castanha, virai costas a castanha. Não queirais ser castelhana, senhora, senhora do Almortã, senhora do Almortã. Na vossa capela cheira, cheira a cravo, cheira a cravo, cheira a rosa, cheira a cravo, cheira a rosa, cheira a flor de laranjeira, senhora, senhora do Almortã, senhora do Almortã. Eu para o ano não prometo que me morreu, que me morreu amor, que me morreu amor. Ando de